Welcome to 360 Money Matters, where financial planners Billy and Andrew talk all things financial planning. This podcast aims to increase your knowledge and confidence with all things money. Each week, they will cover topics like wealth creation strategies, investment principles, creating passive income, paying off your debt faster, and much, much more, so you can live a life on your terms without limits.
Hello and welcome back to the 360 Money Matters podcast. I'm Billy and I'm joined by my co-host,
Andrew. Good to be back, Bills. Back again for another podcast.
Mate, always good to be in here with you recording this podcast. And today, I guess we're keeping on the theme of superannuation. We discussed that in some detail last week, but got some more exciting and juicy news to go through in today's podcast.
Yeah, well, there's been a whole raft of changes and a whole raft of things that are coming in as of 1st of July this year. So we figured we'd jump on the mic and basically spell out some of the more significant changes that are happening in the superannuation environment.
You know what I find interesting? Like, this is superannuation, generally speaking, is slow and boring and build my wealth and worry about it.
We're talking about it.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, this is the excitement in our voice about some changes. And we did last week's episode on superannuation and getting money into super. Yeah, there's obviously some changes coming through that we're quite excited about, can really help drive wealth creation from a retirement perspective. And yeah, no, it's just an interesting change from being so excited about superannuation. I don't know how you feel about it, but it gets my blood pumping. So
I love it. Super's the best. I mean, at the end of the day, where else can you avoid tax and do it legally? I don't know whether there's any other environments that you can.
Actually, that's the exciting part, isn't it? It's not the superannuation part. It's the zero tax environment if you get it right.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. So we'll go with that one for sure. Andrew, lead us in. There's 6 significant changes that we wanted to talk about today to superannuation. Once again, these have been passed through Parliament legislation. So they're coming into effect 1st of July 2022. So the start of the financial year. Run us through what's the first one out of the 6 that we want to talk about.
Yeah, so look, the first change to superannuation is there's a removal of the work test when people are from 67 to 74. So long story short, what previously was happening was if you were making after-tax or salary sacrifice contributions towards super, if you were over the age of 67, you needed to prove that you were working as a minimum 40 hours in a calendar month in order to be able to make contributions towards superannuation. That was designed to do, which, you know, we've spoken about it a million times in the podcast, is make sure that people can still contribute to super and make sure that people aren't relying on the government for age pension and whatnot, but also make sure that you're limiting how much money they have in that environment. Because as we bang on about, after the age of 60, it's an environment 65, it's an environment that's completely exempt from tax.
You're pressing all my hot buttons here, Andrew, right? So there was some restrictions on what you can and can't do with super, but this is exciting because it's a watering down of those restrictions.
Yeah, exactly. So now you're 67, you've got a lump sum amount of money, you've, for whatever reason, whether that's have sold a house, saved up, whatever the reason is, under previous rules, unless you could prove that you were working, you know, that test previously was 40 hours in a calendar month, you weren't able to put that money towards superannuation. Whereas now, up until the age of 74, there's no work test, no requirement to prove that your status is employed in order to be able to contribute towards superannuation. If you're salary sacrificing or putting after-tax or non-concessional contributions in, you can do so without the need to satisfy the work test.
So essentially the hurdle to get more money into super, being the work test, working 40 hours in a calendar month, has been removed.
Exactly right. Now, a thing to note on that is, even though that's still for after-tax contributions towards super and salary sacrifice contributions towards super, this doesn't apply to personal contributions that you claim a tax deduction on. So what that means is, if your employer is making salary sacrifice contributions towards super, no worries, you can, so long as you're staying within the caps and whatnot that we've obviously spoken about, I think in the previous podcast, so long as you're staying within the caps, you can salary sacrifice towards super. But if you make a personal contribution towards super, so under normal circumstances, so myself and Billy approaching it, but we're both under the age of 67. So If we make a personal contribution towards super, before we do our tax return and after the end of the financial year, what you can do is change the status of that contribution from after-tax non-concessional to a pre-tax concessional contribution so that it becomes tax deductible. The removal of the work test, so you can still make that after-tax contribution, but you can't change it to a deductible contribution if you make a personal contribution. The only way to be able to make essentially pre-tax contribution towards super after the age of 67 is to make a salary sacrifice contribution.
Yep. Well, look, I mean, on the surface, this is a step in the positive direction to try and encourage people to get more money into superannuation. I guess it's fair to say that people are working longer in terms of not necessarily retiring in the traditional sense of hitting age 65 and then you're retired. But once again, from a wealth creation perspective, because life expectancy continues to grow, which is a great thing, anything that helps and encourages people to commit more money into superannuation and the removal of those barriers, we see it as a really positive step in the right direction. So I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think it's a really good initiative from the government to be able to encourage people to continue to put money into super without necessarily needing to have that hurdle about meeting the work test, because 40 hours calendar month, maybe you're only doing 5 hours a week of part-time work and that's enough for you as somebody who's in retirement, but why should that preclude you from getting money into superannuation? So I definitely think it's a step in the right direction. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So Bill's, take us on to point number 2. What's the second sort of large change that's happening with super?
So yeah, last week we spoke about the downsizer contribution. That was really the ability to be able to get, I guess, the equity that's tied up in your family home, asset rich, cash poor, getting that equity if you decide to sell your property and downsize it. And that coincides with sort of a couple of things, but you tend to think that over time, you don't need such a big house if you've raised a family, you've got your 3 or your 4 bedrooms, it's probably too big. How do we get that money and actually put it to use? Because the truth is that you're not generating any money from your owner-occupier. If you sell your property, you can add $300,000 per person into superannuation without impacting any of the contribution caps that we were describing before. But what's actually changing is there was an age restriction. You needed to be a certain age in order to get money or in order to use the downsizer contribution. That age was previously 64. That has now been reduced to age 60. So essentially it's opening up the scope or the amount of people that can use that downsizer contribution. And once again, it just sort of similar to my previous comments, it's adding more flexibility to be able to get more money into superannuation and just removing some of the barriers that we had previously. So nothing changes in terms of the amount that you can get in. It still needs to be your owner-occupier property, still capped at $300,000 per person. The only thing that's changed here is the age restriction has come down. So you can access that option earlier, which is, once again, absolutely fantastic initiative.
Yeah. And I think what it also does is it starts to bring in line. I mean, when you consider someone that's looking to retire and looking to put money towards super, you're not doing it, or you shouldn't be doing it, the very last second before you retire. Most people are planning in advance. So a lot of the troubles that we were having as advisors is you're trying to plan for it in advance. You're trying to plan for downsizer contributions in advance because you're estimating to retire by, figurative client is estimating to retire at 65, but you can't actually downsize, sell your house and contribute towards superannuation and use the downsizer provisions until you're over the age of 65. Well, that's what it was previously. So for us, it means a lot more flexibility when you're designing strategies for clients and when you're talking about, ways to pump money into superannuation, because you're not having to wait until the very last second before someone retires or very last second before you're no longer working. You can actually plan for it in advance. You can downsize, make sure the money is in superannuation, know how much you're going to have. You don't have that uncertainty around what you're going to sell your property for and what you're going to buy, and know that you can start to work part-time and start to, whatever the scenario is or that transition to retirement is, you can start planning for it significantly earlier. So really great initiative from our perspective.
And plus the psychology around that. Like I've had clients before where there's, like if you consider that scenario where you are retiring, you're turning 65, you can access your superannuation, you're downsizing your family home forever, work. That's all daunting. And trying to separate some of these things gives you a little bit more, I guess, headspace. So from a psychological perspective, it seems to be a bit easier as well too. So this will just be another thing that helps people in that position, that you can access it earlier. So like I said before, I think it's a fantastic initiative, and looking forward to ticking over the 1st of July and, putting some of that into practice with some of the people that we're talking to. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Andrew, you want to run us into the next one?
Yeah. So next topic is around, again, we're talking about contributions to super. So you're getting a bit of a theme that people are starting to be able to, or the government is starting to allow people to be able to put a little bit more towards superannuation. I think they're realizing that we have to allow people to contribute towards superannuation because that's how they're going to be self-funded retirees. So the next sort of big change is previously the bring forward rule, which is if you contribute, so you've got a cap of $110,000 in after-tax contributions that you can make towards superannuation. The bring forward rule allows you to bring forward 3 years worth of contributions, so $330,000, and then not make contributions for the next 2 financial years after that. So you're basically saying, all right, instead of doing 110, 110, 110, I'm going to do 330 and then nothing for the next 2 financial years after that. Now, that wasn't available for people over the age of 67. So previously, before the change that I'm about to run through, you weren't able to use the bring forward rule. So you could still make the $110,000 non-concessional contribution. However, if you're over the age of 67, you couldn't bring forward 3 years worth of contributions. That is now being opened up. So now you can use the bring forward rule all the way up until age 74. So you consider someone that had already reached or that was previously age 67, they would only be able to put $110,000 in non-concessional contributions towards super over the course of a number of years. Whereas someone that's age 67 or anywhere from 67 to 74 can put a lump sum, $330,000 after tax towards superannuation and utilize the benefits of the bring forward rule.
Yeah. So once again, really opening up the parameters of the flexibility really about getting money into superannuation, which is great. Exactly. Just on that note, Andrew, too, you were talking about bringing forward 3 years of contributions. The $110,000 that's available each year is assuming that you haven't done any. If you have actually used some of it, that eats into it. So if you want to bring forward $330,000 worth of contributions, but you've used, say, 30 of it already, you can only do 300. So it is part of a cap. But once again, the maximum amount is 330 total. But yeah, that's fantastic. Being able to increase it from 67 to 74, once again, just increases the ability for people. And once again, I guess this is really designed around having those large amounts of money at that particular point in time. And I'm starting to get the feeling that this is leading towards a fair bit of the exchange or the transfer of value of a property and money and wealth that's sitting there that's not being productive because it's just sitting there. It's not deriving an income. And it's really opening up the opportunity to put that to work in an investment environment where it can generate a rate of return to derive an income from. So these few things in combination with one another should really help people, if they're sitting on a fairly large asset, to be able to put some of that income to work, to be able to help fund lifestyle in retirement.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. Fourth one. What's the next point, Billy?
Probably one that's been overlooked for a long period of time. The 10% super guarantee contribution that your employer pays. There's always been, and it was probably more so from an administrative burden, I perceive more than anything, but if you were earning as an employee less than $450 per month, your employer was not required to pay your 10% super guarantee contribution. That requirement has been scrapped. So regardless of how many hours that you're working or how much money, I shouldn't say hours because it's based on money earned, how much money you're earning per month. So if you're, say, in a position where you're not doing a lot of work and you're not earning a lot of money, you're still growing your superannuation. You're still receiving your 10% on the amount of money. Whereas traditionally, if you were earning less than $450 a month, your employer didn't have to pay that. So To a certain extent, it was an unfair advantage to the employer, and it was disadvantaging people that weren't earning a lot of money in that month from their employer. And this has really just cleaned that up and squared that up. So I think that's only fair and equitable. And especially if you're earning such a small amount of money, it's even more imperative that you're building towards your wealth creation from a retirement perspective. So that one was a no-brainer for me and couldn't really understand sort of why it was like that in the first place. But the only thing that I can sort of think of is from an administrative perspective, it's very difficult to administer traditionally in the past. Probably a lot easier now with modern day payroll systems and things, but yeah, could never understand why that's the case. But that's been removed. So if you are earning less than $450 per month, from the 1st of July, you'll be receiving your super guarantee contribution of, well, I'd say of 10%, but that probably rolls into the next thing, which I might just jump on now that I've put that in front of us. But the super guarantee contribution at the moment is 10%. So everything that you're earning at the moment, your employer needs to pay 10% into superannuation. As at 1st of July, that is being increased to 10.5%. So this is the long-standing target that the government has to achieve a 12% super guarantee contribution target. So eventually, if we stay on the same glide path, we'll be receiving as employees 12% of our remuneration package as super guarantee contributions, so 12% going into super. But it's changing from 10% to 10.5% 1st of July this year as well. So that's a really good initiative because it just means that more money is going into superannuation to save for our retirement savings.
Yeah. And I guess that's a bit of a public service announcement for both employees. So if you're earning less than $450 a month, you want to make sure and double check that that's actually reflective in your super's getting paid. Likewise, you want to double check and make sure that on your pay slips that 10% has gone up to 10.5% and that's been recorded and captured accurately. And also for employers out there as well. So a good point to sit down, double check, make sure that you're paying the right amounts of super, whether you've got casual or part-time employees that are earning less than $450, where previously you wouldn't need to pay super, or whether you're any business really that has employees, making sure that you're doing that uptick in terms of the SGC and the super contributions from 10% to 10.5%.
Yep. Well summarised, Andrew. Andrew, you want to hit us up the last one that we've got?
Yeah, last point was, so first home super saver scheme. I think that's what it is.
That's a bit of a mouthful. Whoa, yeah. Try and repeat that one 3 times fast.
So previously what it was is for obviously first home buyers, allowing them to salary sacrifice funds towards superannuation and withdraw that money afterwards at a period of time after, in order to use that as a deposit for a house or a deposit for their first home. Now, that was the entire benefit around that, and this is probably a separate podcast or recording in itself, but the entire benefit around it is if you're salary sacrificing, you're obviously paying concessional rates of tax, so 15% as opposed to your marginal rate of tax. So you're basically putting it into an environment whereby, your savings capacity is increasing because you're only being taxed at 15% as opposed to marginal rates. And then you're pulling the money out as a deposit at a future point in time. So it's basically supercharging your savings and allowing you to save significantly faster than what you would have been by salary sacrificing funds towards superannuation. Previously, the limit on how much you could use or how much you could salary sacrifice was $30,000. So that was how much you could put towards superannuation and then draw out the lump sum deposit. That is now increasing. So as of 1st of July, that's going from $30,000 limit to $50,000 limit. So really a couple of things that are happening there. I mean, obviously it allows first home buyers and people that are planning to put money towards a deposit for a property, allows you to save more money or shield more money from tax in order to use as a deposit. But I think what the government's also recognizing is the rapid rise in property prices, that 30% deposit on an average property in Melbourne is not very much. And so they're now expanding that out and allowing people to salary sacrifice and then pull that $50,000, representing the larger deposit that's required with the pretty insane rise in property prices at the moment.
Look, I think you're right. Thinking through this logically, it's definitely a step in the right direction. But I think all this is almost just keeping in line with what we've seen happen in property prices recently. From the government's perspective, I actually think this could go a lot further. Because you're right, saving 50 grand towards your first home is a feat within itself. So anything that you can do to help people, first home buyers in particular, who are limited by deposit and maybe saving capacity and serviceability restrictions in a growing property market is challenging enough. Is $50,000 enough to be able to get you that deposit that you need? Yeah, I guess you could argue either point, but I reckon that there's more scope in that. I think that should almost be doubled to $100,000. But seeing the increase from 30 to 50 is definitely a step in the right direction and should help first home buyers getting their deposit up even faster now. So fingers crossed that there's a fairly large uptake with that and that it's being encouraged and it's being used by the people who can really benefit from it.
Yeah, exactly right. And well summarized. So really, I think the theme in every single one of these points is more money in super.
More money in super. And I can't believe I'm saying this, which is really positive, but it's more money in super and there's more flexibility and it's a step in the right direction to encourage people to get more in, and it's removing some of those barriers.
Yeah, which is really weird. I mean, if you kind of think about things historically, it was kind of things were a little bit laxed, a little bit easier towards putting funds towards superannuation. And then I can't even remember when it was. I think it was 2018.
Yeah, 17, 18. Yep.
They started putting some restrictions around too much money towards super and restrictions around contributions. And I feel like it's now swinging in the other direction again and starting to relax the barriers and encourage more people to have more money in super, which I dare say that if you ask any financial advisor, you'd be hard pressed to find one that isn't going to say that that's a step in the right direction.
Let's not count the chickens too quickly, right, before they hatch, because once again, we're in an election year this year. Yeah. So who knows, maybe we have a change of government and they decide to tweak around with this. I mean, I don't know, but what's definitely passed through and what is going to go through on the 1st of July is a step in the right direction. Hopefully our listeners got some benefit out of today, and you can start to see in your own particular circumstances, maybe there's some things that we've spoken about that have pricked your ears that you want to get some more information on. If you do, feel free to contact us and our team. Details, like always, are in the show notes. We really encourage everybody to reach out, have a chat and ask any questions or ask further information if required. But Andrew, as always, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for your time today. It was great. And talking about super, I can't believe we're getting this excited about it, but it's the first time in a while that there's some meat on the bone for us to get excited about, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Billy, thanks very much for another great podcast. Thanks again for listening, everyone. And again, as Billy said, if there's anything that you want us to speak about, or if there's any questions in relation to any of the stuff that we've spoken about, details are in the show notes. So please feel free to reach out, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Thanks for listening today. If you have any questions on what we've talked about or would like to have a chat about your money journey, visit us at 360fs.com.au.
Just a reminder to our listeners that the information contained in this podcast is general in nature and it is not intended as personal recommendations for the audience. Please consider whether the information suits your circumstances before acting on it. This information is provided by Billy Amiridis and Andrew Nicolaou of 360 Financial Strategists Pty Ltd, authorised representatives and credit representatives of AMP Financial Planning.